My name is Dr. Justin Bayarjon, and I am Dr. VR. I invite you to register for my podcast to stay updated with new episodes when they're published. Simply click the register button on Dr. VR's channel, as well as the bell icon next to it, to be notified. In this 28th episode, I'm glad to host Richie Easts, who is the co-founder and creative director of Toast Interactive. It's a gaming studio based in Gold Coast, Australia, that is well known for developing the groundbreaking and legendary Richie's Plank experience, named after my guest, as well as Max Mustard, which is a mix of first-person and third-person 3D platform gaming available on the MetaQuest, and now recently available on PlayStation VR. Richie, welcome to Dr. VR.
Oh, mate, thanks for having me.
It is such a pleasure to have you.
Good to be here. I want to just say something first. The game being named after me isn't really true.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. I'll tell you the story. Okay.
Please.
So it was 2016 and VR was just like starting to get out there. The HTC Vive was out and the tracking on that was amazing. And my wife and I, Tony, we started working on I guess you could call it a prototype for what is now the Richie's Plank experience. And we now put it on Reddit, announced that we're making it, and there was people excited, and it was called Walk the Plank.
Oh, it's okay. Interesting.
And then a week later, someone, I think a French studio, announced a similar game called The Walk. And every ounce of me that knows about branding knows that this is not a good idea and that generic brand names don't stand out. And Walk the Plank was very generic. And knowing that there's a competitor coming out with one called The Walk, we're like, people aren't going to know what's what, and it's going to be a nightmare. Even if one is better than the other, they're not going to know them apart in the store. So
true.
I was like, we were just having coffee and we were like, we need to just make it a more brandable name. I was like, let's just put Jim, my dad's name, Jim's Plank Experience. And that's a whole nother story because there's a popular lawn mowing company in Australia called Jim's Mowing. And I was mowing lawns at the time. And my wife was like, no, people will think we're trying to copy Jim's Mowing. And I'm like, oh, anyway, this is... No one called me Richie at the time, so let's just call it Richie. And I'm like, cool, it doesn't matter the name. And now everyone calls me Richie, so it's like they think I'm that person, even though we kind of roll with that, and I am used to being the Richie now. But back in the day, it wasn't intended for it to be like that.
That's so interesting. Something that caught my attention. You mentioned it's a French studio that called their experience The Walk. Now, I'm thinking it could be related to Philippe Petit, because I'm French myself. It could be related to Philippe Petit, the Frenchman, who actually walked in between the World Trade Center decades ago.
Yeah,
and they called
could
it The
have named
Walk.
it after that. But I think they had to change the name because a few years later, the movie The Walk.
Yes, well, related to that. Actually.
Related to that
yes, absolutely.
guy. But I think, yeah. And that movie had just come out. So I'm like, oh my goodness, they've got Hollywood involved. And no, we had a panic, but it turned out okay for us.
That's very interesting. Now, going on what you just tell me, can you share a bit more about your professional and artistic path? What initially attracted you to working with VR, and how did that evolve over time?
Yeah, sure. So I put it back all the way to when I was a little kid, and you get those red and blue 3D glasses.
Oh,
and it might have even been a kids' TV show called Play School, where they show you how to make them and you cut out the cellophane. But then in Brisbane, there was a thing called World Expo 88, which was this big, this is a little city at the time doing a world show, and Japan had a booth. And in the Japan booth, they had a 3D movie with the red and blue glasses. And I would have been 10, so yeah, like 35 years ago. and it made like flying pigs fly into the screen, and I'm just like, this is the future. And it was just those red and blue glasses, and I was obsessed, and I'd even practiced drawing, trying to draw in 3D like that. Wasn't very good. And then the lawnmower came, like jumped forwards like 10 or 15 years or whatever, maybe more, and the Lawnmower Man movie came out.
Of course.
And
Brett Leonard.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Directed by Brett Leonard. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just like blown away. I wanted to figure out how to get VR on your PC. I was in high school. Yeah. Anyway, I was obsessed with it, and then uh, VR, and then jump forward again to 2016. I was on a honeymoon with my wife Tony in Japan, actually, and we tried VR for the first time there, and it was at this Bandai Namco demo shopping center, and there was a plank style experience there, and that's the only thing people were waiting to try, and there was a dozen other options, and I tried a whole heap of them, and I'm like, I did the plank, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is good. And then I was like, oh, I could take this to the next level and add other features, and I designed a way to clone any shaped plank of wood into VR space, and added the flying and a few other things, and yeah, then we released it, and it that's how it all started, I think. Yeah.
It's interesting because it always starts in the childhood, in your childhood when you're
Yeah.
inspired by something that really captivated you, whether it's a movie, it's a video game, it's a
Yeah.
3D experience, like you mentioned. And it's funny how it just propels your imagination.
Yeah. I've only started, I was mowing the lawn the other day, and knew that I was coming on your podcast, and I was starting to piece it all together myself, because something you just don't think about. But I'm like, oh my goodness, I was obsessed with it back then. And then, yeah. And so, yeah, so I had an IT degree, and I was in the travel industry for 20
No.
years or so. And then I'd make games as a hobby.
Mm.
I did game jams once a year or so just to learn it, but I never took it seriously as a profession, because it is a tougher industry for IT professionals, and the chance of making money is a lot smaller. Um, and so, but when VR came out, I'm like, oh, there's a window of opportunity here, and being an early adopter, yeah.
Absolutely. That's interesting. Can you tell us more about the VR community and market in Australia?
Yeah, it's, oh man, this is a weird one. So I live in a place called Gold Coast, Queensland,
Hmm.
and since 2000 and something, um, let's just call it over the past 8 years or so, depending on the year, um, nearly 20% of the world's top selling VR games are made in Queensland, which,
Wow.
yeah, it's really weird. Um, and I think it's like, when other people are excited about it. And there was even a hardware guy which sold a lot of tech to international companies, which very strict NDA, and he was based there as well. So I think we feed off each other, and um, it just grows from there. And there's a huge that's part of it too. Yeah. So um, a long while away, there was a lot of big AAA studios in
Hmm.
Queensland, and they were given government tax breaks, and it was very kind of weird. Like, they joked that it was brown paper bags full of cash to operate here,
Hmm.
and then there was a change of government, and that was all shut down. And
Oh,
then we had hundreds and hundreds of AAA talent without a job, and so that pushed them into a very strong indie scene. And I think the reverberation of that led to there being early adopters in VR as well.
That's very interesting because we're both part of the Commonwealth. Yeah, I'm in
Ah,
Canada,
yeah.
you're in Australia, and a lot of gaming companies here, basically revolve on like you said, like uh, government tax refund and things like that. So I think we can
Mm-hmm.
relate a lot about that.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a very interesting take. But something that really caught my attention that I absolutely love while doing my research before the interview, I discovered something I absolutely love. Toast Interactive is led by yourself and your wife, Tony. And I
Mm-hmm.
simply adore this. Could you tell us more about what brought you guys to work together and your shared passion for the medium?
Yeah. So before I go there, I'll just say the past 2 years have been incredible by the government here. Like, it made it sound like I was complaining about the past, but really they're bringing it back. So
Oh,
the,
nice.
the Australian government is really getting the assistance back for game devs. So they're taking it very seriously, and it's state and federal assistance, which is incredible. So there's a lot of it's happening again, which is great. But yeah,
That's
so shout
great
out to
news.
them.
Yeah, that's great news because great companies like yours are actually benefiting from
Yeah,
this tax refund, and that's great to
yeah.
hear.
So back to our personal relationship. It started off with a honeymoon, so it was just right timing, and we were in between jobs at the time. Like I was actually mowing lawns, even though it was I was trying to do a tech startup, like the Uber of lawn mowing,
Oh, that's
and
cool.
it was called Green Socks, and we mowed 1,000 lawns in the first year. But ultimately, it didn't work out, so shut it down, and we were still in between jobs. So, but yeah, it was. Um, as soon as a new opportunity came out, I was like, yeah, let's jump at that. So, relationship wise, yeah, it was great. But then, like everyone says that works with their partner, it gets hard because you have disagreements at work, and then you have disagreements at home, and they
Hmm.
start to get more and more difficult. So even though we work together very well most of the time, um, and about 2 years ago, Tony stepped down as CEO, and we're both still owners in the business, but Tony doesn't actively work in it anymore. And um, yeah, that's been a lot easier. And so yeah, shout out to Tony for recognizing that, and yeah,
Absolutely. Shout out to Tony.
we were very proud that we were able to work so well together for so long.
Absolutely. That's great to
Yeah.
hear. Um, so you and your team, again, have developed, and I'm sure everybody knows about it, developed one of the most groundbreaking and well-known VR experiences ever released since the mainstream release of VR around 2015, 2016. Of course, Richie's Plank experience. And honestly, I think I'm not the only VR enthusiast in the world who can't think of a better game than yours as the perfect way to introduce folks to VR. I basically introduced all of my family members to VR with it. Could you tell us more about its inception and how that idea sprouted in your mind? I know you mentioned the Bandai fair in Japan, but what about making it? What about designing? The city in which the experience is settled in. How, how did you develop all of this? Because this is a groundbreaking experience that changed everything in the VR world.
Yeah, I think there's a few questions there and a few stories. I'll
Hmm.
start with the how. So it's just prototype and experiment to start with. So my artwork I was not an artist. Um, my art is still questionable, but I managed to get a city together, and it looked horrible, but we went straight out to testing it. Some friends and I worked at a Mexican restaurant, and we thought, let's just take it there on a quieter day, and we set it up in the corner. And when people came to get lunch, we asked if they wanted to try it out, and just so we could get some reactions from real world people. Because sometimes if you go to events, you get reactions from industry people, and that's such a different reaction.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not a general audience. And there was policemen that came through, and families and dads, and
Wow.
where they're all trying it, and yeah, that was scared shitless.
Yeah,
And
tell me about it.
yeah, we set up a real plank, and it was great fun. And so we're like, okay, we got this part right, and we took it home and kept tweaking it and making it look better. And then it released, and yeah, it started selling. And we're like, if we do 1,000 sales by Christmas, we'll keep going full time. And it did that. And then we're like, this still looks really ugly. So we went out and searched the world for the best 3D artist we could find. And yeah, that's when they made it look how it looks on PC today.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, I forget the other part of that question.
The other part of that question is, how do you, like you said, you invited people trying it on and they were scared shitless, like you mentioned, and I get it. But how do you make this happen? Designing, like thinking of, I'm going to go put a plank up on the 80th floor of a
Okay.
building and walk people through it. Ask
Yes.
people to walk through it.
Yes. Okay. So I thank you for your compliment, by the way, before about it being the game that people put in to show VR. And I would like to put that compliment back onto the VR tech itself. So there, Richie's Plank shows VR. Thanks to VR, there is no other game where it's rubbish in flat screen and good in VR.
That makes
The
sense.
difference between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a first-person shooter. First-person shooters are pretty good in flat screen and amazing in VR. Richie's Plank would probably be the worst game in history if it was flat screen, but it's reasonable in VR, like a plank walking simulator. And a flat screen, and when people watch it on TV, they're like, why are they freaking out? Like, it's just a picture of the plank. But when you're in there, it's not your brain thinking, it's your heart. And so we realized that really quickly, that this is people's emotions that are being, like, they're real emotions, and they can't choose to turn them off, and they're being surprised. And so we're like, why is that? And then so we milked, knowing this knowledge, we milked it we abused that a little bit by, and when I say abuse, I mean we utilize the power of VR more than as much as possible. So an example, we have everything up close to start with in a box, which is the elevator.
Mm-hmm.
And we have detail in that elevator, and once the doors open, it's the opposite of that, where there's things all the way to the horizon. And when you look down to do more parallax effect, we have as many different 3D objects at different distances as possible, and different shaped objects to really multiply that parallax effect. So like the air conditioner vents, smoke, light beam, light rays, rope,
A plane passing by.
helicopter,
Yeah.
window facades, flags, birds. And so when you look down, you're not thinking about all these individual objects, but your body is seeing them, and like, and also the sound. So there's as you walk the plank and the doors open, there's like 15 different sounds that do things at different timings. So, what's an example? There's multiple winds. So when you turn, do you know when you're, let's say, it's especially noticeable when you're skydiving, or if it's a windy day, if you turn your head and face the wind, it
Yeah.
sounds totally different
Spatial
to,
audio. Yeah.
yeah. And we didn't do anything special with spatial audio. We just placed two sounds in the scene with stereo that are mono sounds, and when you
hmm
turn your head, we change how they operate. Um,
Yeah. The wind works well, and the creaking of the plank is
yeah,
what makes it. Yeah, it
yeah.
does.
So to do that, there's different triggers put along the plank, and as you move through the triggers, it plays a creak sound. So it's not constantly playing; it's only playing when you move. So
hmm
if you move slowly, it creaks slowly. If you move fast, it creaks fast. So it feels like it's your footsteps doing it, but yeah, there's no footsteps. And then some of the ones people don't realize is a very subtle, constantly escalating heartbeat. So
Really? Okay.
yeah, it's very subtle. You don't want people to think about it because then they're like, well, why are they playing the sound of a heart beating? But it's just getting faster and faster, and then it resets and then goes faster and yeah, and then like an out as you look down, like an out of tune violin,
Yeah.
and which is a bit unnerving, but again meant to be subtle. So all these things together to help you give a feeling that you can't get anywhere else in a short amount of time.
Ugh, and man, it's rare that I've experienced a VR game that really reproduces what we should experience in a real life situation like this one. And you just put in goggles and VR goggles, and you're like, I'm just going to walk this plank like nobody else. I've put in students who've never done VR before, and some of them are like, yeah, that's fine. I know I'm in VR. And they just walk a straight line. I'm like, that's cool. And then you have other people have no idea because I don't cast, the image on a TV. I want everybody to have an individual experience.
Mm,
And some people, they can't walk the plane. The plank. They scream. They stay there for 10 minutes and they shake. They don't even
yeah,
have the reflex of taking out the headset. It's
yeah.
just wonderful. But what I think works so well is stereoscopy. Stereoscopy works better in VR. So stereoscopy is 3D, of course, as you probably know, and you mentioned it before, the film industry, yeah, as you tried back in the Japan Expo in 1988. The film industry has been attempting time and time again to resuscitate 3D in film, either good or debatable attempts. In VR, from an industry perspective, but also from a scholarly one, it's been proven that stereoscopy reaches its best in VR to the point that it prompted the development of medical and educational tools in VR because of its effectiveness.
Mm.
Can you discuss the use of 3D in the development phase of a VR game, as it is, of course, key in a game such as Richie's Plank Experience?
Yeah. So I touched on it a little bit before, but
Yeah.
having it's like when you go to a beautiful monument or somewhere beautiful, right? And it's big, like the Grand Canyon, or seeing a whale in the water, or I don't know, something, even the Eiffel Tower, like anything that's got some serious size to it. You can't take a photo of it because the photo doesn't do us justice. It's because a photo is not big. It's like, oh, it's as big as the photo. And then, so VR is the only way to capture something and still have it feel epic and amazing after you're not there anymore. So um, when we in Richie's Plank, as an example, we made sure there was small things and big things to show the difference of scale, and
Yeah.
it makes it so much better. And then also the things that are up close to you, and the things that are far away from you. So that kind of effect in a photo or flat screen, the only way they can do that is by blurring the background for
True.
the depth of field. But in VR, you don't want to blur the background because you just show that it's further away, and the player's like, oh, that's further away. And yeah, but it is. You mentioned the medical
Yep.
industry using it for
Hmm.
VR, and we're pretty proud that there's some people that I didn't realize. There's people out there that have a debilitating fear of heights.
Yes.
Like it affects their work, and I'm like, how would it affect their work? Just get it like they have a desk job, and they're like, well, they don't use the escalators. They can't get to their office. Like they can only get a desk job that's on the ground floor. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So like it it really affects their life. So I'm not sure how many are using it now, but we know of a few psychologists that were using it for exposure therapy.
Yep. Fight in order to fight people's fears. It's true.
Yeah. So they would just say, look, you don't have to walk out on the plank. You can just go to the elevator floor and we just hang out there.
Hmm.
And I'll talk you through it. And they'll just hang out there until they're calm. And they're like, oh, this is can take a while, multiple sessions. But yeah, they would use that um, just little bits at a time. And I'm like, oh, that's nice. Um, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. But I just think it's funny that the first thing that you mentioned when asking where that passion comes from, it's from that 3D experience that you had back in
Oh,
1988 with
yeah,
3D pigs coming at you.
yeah,
Because the first thing that comes to my mind when playing Richie's Plank experience is the 3D effect, how
yeah,
stereoscopy is so effective. So
yeah,
that's why it's so interesting that it's the first thing you mentioned.
yeah. Well, to me, that's it. Just it's proof that VR does make a difference because yeah, you see a picture of the plank
Hmm.
and it's like whatever, and then you go in there and it's like very very different. And to me, that's the proof that VR is a legitimate thing. That it it has significant difference from flat screen.
Absolutely. But now they're filming in spatial, in spatial video. They can use your
Oh,
iPhone and you can use it with the Apple Vision Pro, and you can
yeah.
film in 3D now. So it
Oh, you can
brings in,
film in three.
you
Yeah,
can film in 3D and it adds a layer of
yeah.
reality to it.
I've
Uh,
started doing that with my kids. Yeah,
exactly. Me too,
yeah.
actually.
I hope future grandpa Richard will look back and be like, "Thanks for recording these videos, old Richard."
Exactly, in 3D, like if you were
In
here,
3D.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And as I previously mentioned, I always use Richie's Plank experience to introduce VR to people, and the reactions are always the same. It goes from, oh my God, it looks too real, or I'm gonna fall, and they panic. The sound effects, the stereoscopy, again, the immersion is at its apex in your game. And for the people who have never experienced it, in Richie's Plank experience, you take an elevator up the 80th floor of a skyscraper, the door opens, and there's a wooden plank position on the edge of the building, and you have to walk on it. It always reminded me of the Looney Tunes, gag where I don't know, the coyote takes an elevator and it opens in the void and he falls. But
Oh,
in
yeah.
this case, we have a plank. And I've seen family members refuse to walk on a few steps on solid ground, thinking they were going to fall because they had vertigo. So this
Yeah.
confirms that the use of VR has many cognitive and behavioral effects on the human brain. Uh, Most importantly, how a person reacts and interacts with various virtual environments depends on a number of technical and also psychological features, and the most distinctive of which are immersion and sense of presence. And another factor is the magnitude of sensory simulation. So the effect of immersion is greater in the case of simultaneous stimulation, of more sensory systems, like the congruence of stimulations of different modalities and the intensity of those stimuli. So, how do you create such an experience about, having all of these effects? How do you create such an experience that I consider to be the Citizen Kane of VR? I'm just wondering about the vertigo, because I don't know, there's something special about it. And also the fact that people panic, and it can lead to safety issues at the same time. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So regarding the safety, there's like safety message in the game where it will
Yeah.
talk about, um, and it is important to follow them
Yeah.
and make sure anyone else that uses it after you tell them as well, and have a set of rules because um, it there is adrenaline involved, and some may consider it like an adrenaline sport,
Yeah, that's what I
even though you're
mentioned,
just at
a
the
mix of
stage.
behavioral effects and all
Yeah,
these things. Yeah.
it doesn't, even though it's, putting on a headset is safe and walking is safe, but because all that adrenaline's involved, it should be taken very seriously as well. So um, we require that you follow the safety rules. Like so, there's three main ones: to use two spotters that are both capable of catching you, if needed. So standing right next to you, um, and have a strict no pushing and no touching rule. There's like, if there's kids around, they always want to push and touch, and so just have to get them out of the room if they can't follow those rules, kind of thing.
Yeah, we've seen so many videos of people jumping into their
Yeah,
TVs,
oh,
and just, yeah,
it's painful.
it is.
So yeah, don't let don't let people think it's funny to push and touch, because not only that, it takes the person in there away from the experience, and it stops them trusting the people in the room.
Hmm.
And now they're thinking about trust instead of just enjoying the experience. So that's it. It not only makes it dangerous, but it negatively affects their moment. And then the other one is no jumping off the plank. So it's designed to give you a surprise if you step off, but don't don't jump off. Yeah. So because there's lots of adrenaline involved, and we try to let people know about that. And um, with the why does it work? So I think about this quite a lot. So like, there's people, we've had friends walk that couldn't walk the plank, and they've skydived before, and it's like,
Yep.
and bungee jumped, and you're trying to figure out what's wrong with them, because why could you skydive but not do walk a piece of wood? And they're like, and then they were like, why? Yeah, why? And they said, because I had a parachute when
Oh,
they
that's
skydived.
interesting.
And I'm like, what? Yeah, so they felt safe because they had a parachute, but in VR they didn't have anything to save them when they walked the plank. And I'm like, man, that's a nice compliment, but I thought it was very interesting.
It is. That's what I meant by cognitive and behavioral elements that just clash together to
Mm,
create an experience, because on hardwood floor. You're on
yeah,
flooring, hard flooring.
yeah.
And
So, and then it's still, but why? Why couldn't there? Yeah, and so the why, yeah. So, um, you have your conscious mind, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And then you have your subconscious. So your conscious mind knows that they're safe and it's not real, and that all they have to do is walk a few steps. But their subconscious is screaming and yelling and pumping you full of all sorts of adrenaline and what's those bad ones? The stress hormones. I don't know all that.
Oh, yes, I know what you mean. Yes.
Um, yeah, uh, it doesn't matter. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes,
All
I
those
know.
bad things to make you feel panicked and in danger. So your body's getting pumped full of those because your subconscious is seeing all of this, the heights, and it triggers vertigo instantly, and that releases all those drugs. Your heart rate goes up, and it's now at battle with your conscious mind. Your conscious is saying, it's all right, it's all right. but your subconscious is in an extreme get the F away from here panic. And that battle in your mind is distracting as well.
Hmm.
And so uh, it is like bungee jumping. When you're bungee jumping, that same thing happens. Your conscious mind has to override your subconscious, which some people call their heart. That's like, no, it's okay. We're going to be safe. But meanwhile, your internal body is just yelling and yeah,
Oh, well, yeah. Do you really trust that elastic? Do you really trust that parachute
yeah,
that your friend mentioned? But it's funny, they do, but they don't trust that they're on hard floor.
yeah. Eventually they do. Most
Yeah,
people can override, and they eventually like it's okay. You can and you know when people are doing it because they're just saying to themselves over and over, "It's not real. It's not
yeah.
real. It's not real." And yeah, so they're reminding themselves, trying to tell the rest of their body that it's okay.
Yeah. And it is. And I keep loving it and doing it, even though did it 100 times, because it's just for the heck of it. It's just such a good game. But now I want to discuss about a new game, a new VR game I recently figured out I simply cannot stop playing, which is your latest game, Max Mustard. It's a game that to me really revolutionized the classic platform games such as Super Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog. It's a made for VR platformer and a combination of first person and classic third person platforming, featuring the very charming heroine Max, who has to rescue Mud Pups from the clutches of the villain Stubbins. So, can you guide us through the development journey of that game and how you approach the beloved platform genre by adapting it to VR?
Yeah, sure. So that started um, by being in the US at like a VR. I think it was VRLA, a big conference, and there was a special speaker, a VR speaker, talking about VR games, and they said uh, VR games have to be in first person and not third person. And I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, but one of my favorite VR games at the time was in third person. It was called Hellblade.
Oh, yeah,
And
of
they did a
course.
VR port. I'm like,
Hmm.
I really liked that game. That was third person. Anyway, I didn't think much of what they were saying. Like, I didn't. I just thought it was odd and moved on. And then on the flight home, I was playing Mario Odyssey on the Nintendo Switch,
Yes.
and on the flight, I'm like, oh, this is really good because I loved 3D platformers when I was a kid, and I hadn't played games like that for a very long time. And I noticed having to use the right thumbstick to turn the camera,
Hmm.
and I'm like, um, this is interesting because in VR it would be at the very least the game would be a little bit better, not having to use your thumbstick to turn the camera. You just turn your head to to look around. And um, I think soon after that, Astrobot came out, which on the
Yep.
demo, which proved that it was a viable thing. We had made a prototype around the same time, and I'm like,
Astrobottom, PlayStation 5.
four PlayStation 4.
4. Okay.
This was like years ago,
Okay.
2018 maybe. Yeah. So Astrobot was a PlayStation VR one game that was very popular. Still has a cult following.
Okay.
And
Yes,
so
true.
they kind of proved the viability of a platforming in VR. And then, but that's only on PlayStation One. So yeah, so we love the genre. We made a prototype and it felt great. And we're like, this is. And when we decide what projects to do, it's an old entrepreneurial trick where if you don't know what idea to work on, you just write them all down and you come up with 3 criteria that's important to you, and then you can use that to get a score out of 30, so 10, 10, 10, and you can use that to choose. And that's what we did. So our criteria were potentially profitable was one. Do we want to make it as another? And do we have the ability to make it? And so
Mm-hmm.
he got a decent score on all three. And so that's the game that we went with. And we thought we were going to be a lot more. When we started, we thought it might take 2 years with three of us to make it. But as we started making it, Richie's plank started doing better. My wife and I, Tony, wanted to do. There's now 5 of us in the company. We were probably overworking a little bit, so we hired more people to help us. And then, as that's what happened. We hired another artist, and then he's like, "Cool, first day. Where's the concept artist?" And we're like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I can't just make stuff of my own imagination." And I'm like, "Well, that's what we've always done." Like, it was me being naive and inexperienced. And I'm like, "Oh, okay, we'll get you a concept artist." And then he's like, well, now there's too much work to do. Look at all these concepts. I can't do all these myself. Anyway, now there's 3 artists. And then I was like, oh, this part's so good. Now the rest of the game's lacking a bit. So now we need more developers to get all this art working and functional. And our levels are now 3 times longer each than I thought they would be. And now there's more levels with more mechanics. We need more developers. And then we're like, well, now we need some good music. So now we have to
Right.
get a good musician, and it just kind of escalated. And of course, Richie's plank did well. We're like, okay, we'll spend the money. Got to spend the money to make the money.
True.
And
And I
then,
love how you incorporated Richie's plank in Max Bustard.
oh yeah,
I'm not spoiling anything here, but when I got him, like, that music sounds familiar. And then the magic
yeah,
happened. But sorry to
you
interrupt.
knew what
Please
was
keep
going to
going.
happen.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So that was a fun level. So yeah, like every level is a unique adventure,
Yeah.
like that, and that costs a lot of money to do. Like a lot of games, you play them, and every level has kind of got similarities.
Mhm.
But in Max Mustard, yeah, every level had its own production because
Absolutely.
it is its own production. And that is so that when you finish a level, I can nearly guarantee, Doctor, that you had this feeling like, I'll just have a quick look at the next one. Like, because,
It's always, I literally run out of battery every time I play.
yeah,
I play for an entire battery duration.
wow. Yeah, but that costs a fortune to do, unfortunately. So the game costs quite a bit of money to make. Um, it kind of is a bit tragic because it it probably won't sell enough to get our money back.
Hmm.
But I think it's going to be one of those games that grows a cult following over time and gets bigger and bigger. It'll be a while. I think because, and this is our mistake. When you look at the box art, it looks like it's probably going to be a little kids game. And I'll explain why. But unfortunately, I think it means people we made it for, like adults and mature adults, they might avoid it, which breaks my heart because I'm like, oh, they're going to absolutely love it. And like even been thinking we should put like a personal guarantee that if you don't love it, we'll give you money back, even if Meta don't. Like, because I do guarantee that, and I wish we should find a way to do that.
Let me tell
Um,
you, I'm turning 39 in 2 weeks now, and I'm hooked
yeah,
to this game. I grew up playing Super Mario. My very first video game I played was Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo.
yeah, there you go. That's still my favorite.
It's the best. And
Yeah,
I get that feeling back every time I play.
yeah,
Let me tell you again. I've experienced very little VR games that I'm so eager to go back, especially just because I love the world and the universe and I just want to delve back into it. Last time I experienced it was Half-Life Alex.
Oh wow,
And
that's
now
a
I'm
nice
playing,
compliment.
yeah. Now I'm playing Max Mustard and I'm totally hooked like I
Yeah,
was
nice.
with Half-Life Alex. And it's completely different games. Half-Life Alex is like horror, first person shooter, very violent. Max Mustard is just pure pleasure, pure
Yeah,
fun. Yeah.
yeah. So you've mentioned already three emotions, and it makes me feel good because on the wall for the entire development, we had six different feelings we want the player to feel, and everyone had to every day they saw these emotions of what the player should feel, and yeah, that you've mentioned a few of them already. One of the big one is the feeling of just one more,
Yeah, always.
um, and satisfaction because it's the challenge is there, but not enough to make you like, oh, this
There you go.
feels
Yeah,
good. And then there's the classic delight feeling, um, and yeah, so that's a nice compliment. Thank you. And
you're welcome.
I think more and more about the sales and how we can overcome, I guess, the challenge that we have with it. And like Pixar movies,
Hmm.
like Wall-E is a good reference.
True.
It's clearly made, it's an adult storyline made for adults, but it appeals to kids as well.
Yeah, I honestly
And
believe. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, so that's what we went for. And I don't think uh, I I don't think we've gotten to that messaging for the players yet. And
Hmm.
someone described it on our team a little bit like a bell of who we made it for, because it appears to nearly the same audience as Wally. So younger kids, but also mature adults,
Hmm.
and a lot of teenagers, like especially teenage boys, and they're currently playing like Gorilla Tag and all the shooting games. It's nearly kryptonite for them because they
True.
don't want to play kids games. They want to play the adult games. But then, so the reverse bell curve, it's made for young kids and mature adults. But unfortunately, during development, the target shifted towards the young teens, and they're all playing gorilla tag and shooting each other.
Yeah,
And I'm like, oh.
that's interesting.
And so
Um,
this is just like one of many theories. So I'm like, how do we get the message out to like mature adults that just want good quality game?
just experiencing VR in a different way,
Mm,
because VR, as you mentioned in that talk that you heard, people think of VR as first person experience. It's true. Look, I mentioned Half-Life Alex. Wonderful game. Wonderful game. Also, the thrill of the fight that I absolutely adore. Boxing game, first person. Your game is one of the first I've ever experienced as third person. And that is an accomplishment.
mm,
Experiencing VR like you never did before, you know?
yeah,
And
I
that's what it stands out for. Yeah.
yeah, thanks. I think about that third person thing,
That's something to capitalize on a lot,
and
believe me.
it's weird because when you just say it to someone that hasn't seen Max Mustard, they're like, third person won't work, or they don't understand how it's going to work. And it's because it's still first person.
Yeah, true.
It's like, but it's both.
Yeah,
It's
I
both
just
at the
love how
same time.
you give the leverage to the user to become part of the adventure by being first person. Like you're using a gun, you're using like a blow
Mm,
dryer or something to create air that will
yeah,
help. So it's like a co-op game in a way. It's brilliant.
yeah. You're first person and third person at the same time.
Yeah, but most importantly, when first heard that it was third person, I was scared of motion sickness.
Mm,
And the one thing that fascinated me is the complete absence of motion sickness, something that's very important. So, motion sickness is caused by conflicts between vestibular, proprioceptive, and visual information that trigger visually induced motion sickness.
mm,
I'm very reactive and sensitive to motion sickness, and
interesting.
absolutely nothing happened to me while playing it. I don't know if you are sensitive to it.
I'm not. Not
Good.
anymore. There
Not
was at
anymore.
one point back in the day, but yeah. So we tried a lot of different level layouts.
Hmm.
Um, some that go sideways, and some that go forwards
Hmm.
and up and down, and
Yep.
um, like there's not just turning motion, but there's strafing left and right motion, and the ones that are most safe of movement is forwards and straight.
Yeah.
And so that's why the levels are designed like that as well. I think my kids are waking up and they're just tapping on the door. They can say hello if they want to. Um, so, and I think that could be because of driving. When we drive, it's forwards and straight
Yeah.
most of the time. And in VR, that's by far if there's going to be any movement, forwards and straight is the movement that's safest for our bodies. And you move at around like walking speed, and that so we tried a whole heap of different things, and we settled on where we ended up at,
Yeah.
to help with that.
And to me, it's surprising because at times the camera can move quite fast, especially when you're going through specific areas or traps.
Yeah.
And so far, research says that there are three hypotheses that have been put forward regarding the nature of visually induced motion sickness.
Mm.
The first and the most common is the theory of sensory conflict between visual, vestibular, and somatosensory information, which refers to the sensory system responsible for providing information related to touch, temperature, pain, body position, and movement. The second theory postulates that motion sickness arises as a result of individual instability in controlling posture. And the third is the hypothesis of eye movements in the context of motion sickness, which
Mm.
suggests that certain types of visual motion patterns trigger involuntary eye movements, which in turn contribute to feeling the motion sickness. Like when you're moving in first person, but you're not physically moving, for instance. Now, every time I play, I go through again a full battery because it's so much fun in Max Mustard. So that says a lot about how comfortable of an experience it is. Can you discuss how you approached motion sickness in VR experience development and if there are ways to counter it?
Yeah. So the movement's the biggest one. So the worst kind of movement that we've found is pitch. So if they rotate, making your head do this is fine, but if the game artificially does it for you, it's like instant.
Yeah.
It's instant vomit inducing for most people, um, and I think it's because that movement is what has the biggest imbalance in your ear with your balancing,
Yep. True. Yep.
um, and yeah, backwards. So you can sort them all by worst to least, and so that kind of movement is the worst, and the least is just no movement. But the one under that would be the forwards movement. So we had to design every level to be forwards and straight without left and right movement,
Yeah.
and that was enough. Like we didn't have to put in blinders. We had to carefully code how the camera follows. Um, and even little things like sometimes the character would go find a way to get forwards more than we wanted,
Hmm.
and we didn't want to jump the camera forwards to catch up. So we had to put in a code, some script to have it catch up very slowly. But if Max isn't running, we didn't want to do any catching up. So we'd have to turn that off when she's not running. So I think for every meter traveled, we'd catch up 10 centimeters.
Oh, okay.
So, which is like the length of a finger.
Basically.
We'd let the camera catch up for every like meter, which is like 3 feet or something.
Hmm.
So you catch up, but only while she's running forwards. And if you stop running forwards, you're not catching up anymore. But we
That's the magic. Yep.
yeah, so it happens without you realizing it. And then so when you add polish, I love adding polish to video games, and it's like an art, and I study it. And there's a game called there's a Nintendo game called Smash Brothers, and it has
Of
a lot
course.
of impact polish,
Hmm.
and I would study that. And so one of the things it has is when there's an impact, like two characters punching. Um, there's in Max Mustard, there's a flash of white for 2 to 3 frames, depending on what the frame rate of your computer. Because in VR, a single frame is too quick, so we have to do it for multiple frames. The flash, and um, and then there's a slight pause in the action. But if you pause the action in VR, you're now it's like a little bit motion sickness because you're freezing their natural movement. So we could only pause some of the game, and
Yeah.
we couldn't pause the whole game. We just had to pause the things that are being impacted, and then to show that Max, and this is from Jackie Chan movies. So Jackie Chan has a video out there that he shows how he makes the impact feel good, and when his fist hits their head, they kind of pause there, but then they cut the camera and then play that frame again. And so we don't cut the camera, but we do freeze the impact.
That's
And
interesting.
and um, so here's where it's harder. If Max is moving forwards while doing the impact, and the camera is following, and we've frozen Max for like 200 milliseconds, now the camera would freeze for 200 milliseconds and be like, oh, that was discomforting. And
Hmm.
there was no way to solve it. So we had to do this cheat where we will freeze her. We had to fake it. So we froze her image, but not her body.
Mm. Okay,
So
understood.
the body's still moving forwards, but just her mesh, her 3D model is frozen. So, but now they're out of sync. And then, and it's only for 200 milliseconds. So she would only get like 10 centimeters or so um, out of sync. And then we just had to do a script for her visual to catch up to her actual. And so the
Wow.
camera is silky smooth, like nothing's happened, but her body and position is able to freeze because in the 200, there's a freeze for like 100 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds, and then it would take only 100 milliseconds or so to catch up to herself. And so when you watch a video or play the game, you don't even you don't notice any of this is happening, but it just makes the impacts feel good, and you're like, oh, it feels good to spin kick this enemy or jump on this enemy's head.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. Very satisfying.
Yeah, and then of course you have all the regular stuff like sounds, and
Vibration with the
the animation
controllers.
slows down for a split second as well. You know, like
Yeah.
in Street Fighter Two or the classic Street Fighters, when the final blow is hit and they go into slow motion. Oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, so that's slower animation for a few frames. Little bit of a shake. Yeah, so you can't do screen shake in VR because it's motion inducing as well. So you
Hmm.
have to shake the enemies and the character instead.
That's so
So
interesting. Wow.
yeah, you can do shaking. You just can't shake the player. You just have to shake some things. Um,
Hmm.
and so yeah, we're very proud of all that polish, but it's hard to get it to work whilst the camera is still safe to play. Yeah.
True. But you know what, my friend? I think you might have solved a very important aspect of motion sickness, especially when it comes to Max Mustard. And it's something that should be really brought forward about Max Mustard is experience VR in a whole different way without feeling any type of motion sickness, and something I really appreciated.
Yeah,
We're coming
thanks.
to, of course, my pleasure. We're coming to the end of the interview, and I believe you and your team have really set the standards with virtual reality as a medium that truly immerses people in a virtual environment. And now, with new updates and systems constantly coming out, what do you think VR will look like in the future, and how do you plan to navigate it as a game developer?
So I I made a prediction like 6 years ago that VR will be, for the next 10 years, VR will be bigger than mixed reality,
Hmm.
but there will be a point, and I've probably got the timing a bit wrong, but Meta are hinting at it with their glasses, where we will start to get experiences that overlay the real world. And I think that it might still be 10 years away before that becomes a real affordable thing, but and starts to go mainstream. So my
Hmm.
prediction will be VR is going to be here. It's still a very small niche. I think for games are going to lead the way for a while, but there will be a point in our lifetimes where mixed reality is going to take over everything, like our phones,
I agree. I
because
agree.
we won't need to carry around the phones. We won't have to take it out of our pocket. Like, you just put your hand up and the phone will be where our hand is, because our eyes will make us think it's there.
Hmm.
And that's in my head, it's not like a maybe, it's like a when's that going to happen.
True.
um, and a little bit of proof of that is like the watches do well, and people are already trying to figure out how to use them instead of carrying their phones everywhere. Um, and I, we're still at the very birth of this VR space, and it's going to be around for the rest of human civilization. And that's that's bloody exciting, because we get to be there at the start and see it grow from its nothing to something significant. And it'll it'll be a product that outlasts television and phones and computer screens and cinema screens, because even though all those things will exist, it's that they're not going to die out. It does make them insignificant in terms of a lifespan. Because like, probably not in my lifetime, um, maybe like in 1,000 years, it'll likely just be a small implant that they give to us, and now our meshing between life and computer are kind of one. And it you won't need to wear glasses or contact lenses. It'll
Hmm.
just be, and everyone will get to live a fulfilling life of whatever they can possibly dream. And I think that's pretty amazing. There won't be a, it, the divide between the wealth equality is something that bothers me. It's not fair, but I think with VR and tech in the future, not like that, it doesn't matter. You just need your $200 device, or cheaper probably by then, and everyone gets to do the same things. It's not separating the rich from poor, and I think that's pretty special. Um, I've been watching Apple's headset very closely when they come out with a more consumer-friendly price. And I'll be honest, I was a non-believer at first. I'm like, what the hell are they doing? And then, but then we got one. It cost like $6,000 in Australia. I couldn't believe it. And and
Same
I
thing
don't,
here.
yeah, and it's very good. And the eye tracking, I'm like, this is. And within seconds, I was typing I was typing quicker than I could with a mouse keyboard. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
If there's an
Yep.
on-screen keyboard and I'm using a mouse,
Just type in.
I yeah, and so the typing with my eyes and pinching,
Yep.
it's somewhere between a mouse and actual typing on a keyboard. And I'm like, this is within seconds. And so I'm like, I want to see a speed typer, someone practice typing with their eyes and hand and seeing how fast you can get because,
Hmm.
oh, this is really interesting. And then, so I'm like, yeah, that's going to be how we type in the future kind of thing. And then I tried their new immersive content made by Apple using their special VR cameras that they're not telling you anyone what they are.
It's
So
mind
there's like a
blowing.
whole Reddit
Yeah.
discuss, dedicated to trying to figure out their camera tech. And I'm trying their videos. I'm like, oh, this is really
Next
good.
level.
And I can't find anything that's as good as it on the Quest yet.
Yeah,
The Quest 3 is still by far the best headset value to get.
I agree.
It's got all the content, all the games. It's it's like it's an entertainment powerhouse.
Hmm.
Apple Vision Pro, it's not the value there's not yet, but their video that they've put on their Apple Plus, I'm like, oh yeah, this is we need someone to make content for all the devices because imagine horror movies. Oh, I lost you. Are you there, Doc?
I'm still here.
I'm imagining horror movies with done with that technique, and it's just going to change the game forever.
Absolutely. I agree.
So
And
yeah, we've
you're,
lost Doc. We might have to cut up a little bit the video.
I'm here.
You're on mute,
No, I'm not.
and
Can you hear me now?
oh yeah, there you are.
That's strange. I was not on mute. Okay. So we're gonna conclude that very quickly, just in case. In your view, what are the key elements that define a well put together VR experience?
Um, I would say uh, easy to use and no mucking around. People don't like mucking around in VR, so get into the action and show things big and small and close and far. And I think being able to play it without a tutorial and having to show people what to do. That,
Absolutely.
that's important.
Absolutely. And I think that summarizes what you're doing right now as a VR developer in a couple of words. I absolutely love it. Finally, what's next for you and where can we follow your journey, Richie?
Yeah, so Richie's plank has been neglected for too long. And so we're all hands on deck making it look better, work better, adding new features. We just overhauled the nightmare mode in time for Halloween, and there's all sorts of scary improvements in there. And we're going to keep adding new things to Richie's Plank for
Nice.
years.
Wonderful. And where can we follow you?
We are, if you search for Toast Interactive, we're on all the socials, and that's the best thing to do. Yeah, Toast Interactive or Richie's Plank.
Richie, it was such a pleasure and an honor to have you on Dr. VR. Thank you for accepting the invitation and opening up to myself and my viewers and my listeners to your wonderful VR journey. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.